The material I will present you, as I said before, it's a part of a former mining site repair project, the Águas Claras Future Use Project, that was initiated in early 2020, right before COVID's pandemic, okay? So as this project is still under development, I will focus mainly on its process, then on the results. And I will try also to avoid technical information that may be of no interest for you, and will present instead our conceptual approach in reading the site, so to say, in terms of its cultural landscape. I will comment also what's on stake in the project. But first and foremost, I must say that it's a multidisciplinary work conducted by a wide group of professionals in Brazil, Colombia, and Germany. It's a collaborative work that comprises knowledge fields ranging from architecture, urban planning and geography, to biology, environment, and ecosystem services, anthropology, sociology, and history, not forgetting geology and hydrologic engineering. The project team also included an art curator. So it's a kind of a complex job, such as Inez mentioned before. And the site we will talk about is in the metropolitan region of Belo Horizonte, the capital of Minas Gerais state in southeastern Brazil. Belo Horizonte is inhabited by approximately 4.5 million people. And I would like to begin our conversation with the Águas Claras materiality. So Águas Claras is a former iron ore mining site at Serra do Curral, a mountain range that limits to the south the city of Belo Horizonte. This site of Águas Claras, it's twice as bigger than the urban area of the planned city, as you can see in the red outline to the left. So Belo Horizonte was designed in the end of 19th century to be the new capital of Minas Gerais in the context of the newly established republic in Brazil. And started in 1973, Águas Claras mining exploration lasted around 30 years, during which 200 million tons of high-grade iron ore were extracted from the top of Serra do Curral. The mining process in Águas Claras had an enormous environmental impact on the southern slope of the mountain, leaving behind a gigantic mining pit. That is. So how deep can one go digging the earth? In Águas Claras, the mining pit reached 300 meters down, a depth sufficient to reach Cauê Aquifer, that is a massive body of groundwater that lies beneath the iron formation of the region. This lake, containing pure water, is formed by the resurgence of Cauê Aquifer, so nature resists. The excavation left a pretty big hole, as you can see, at the top of Serra do Curral. Just to give you an idea of how big it is, these are the dimensions of the mining pit. And those of the Mineirão football stadium. It's a pretty big stadium in Belo Horizonte. So the mining pit fits 10 football stadiums inside of it. So that's quite a big hole. And in terms of its natural features, that is very important for us here, Águas Claras lies in a transition zone between two important Brazilian biomes, which is the Atlantic forest and the Cerrado, or the Brazilian savannas. The site possesses a rich environmental heritage that covers about 2/3 of its surface area. we're talking about 1,900 acres. So it's a kind of enormous area. So the site has areas of dense forest, as seen in this picture of Jambreiro Forest, a complex ecosystem that houses rare and endangered species of flora and fauna, such as the Eriocnema fulvonaudi, an endemic species of this particular area, the puma cone color or jaguar, and the Saurophila frontalis, also known as pichocho in Brazil. So comparatively speaking, the Atlantic forest has a wider biodiversity than the Amazon rainforest itself, housing more than 1.6 million species of animals, insects included. The site also has a very rare and delicate ecosystem, inhabiting the shields of ferruginous rocks found at the top of the mountains in this very region. So known as the ferruginous rocky fields, such ecosystem exists only in this area. And by only, I mean on Earth. It's really delicate ecosystem. And as you know well, a site is also a symbolic construction, as if an immaterial layer revested it. This is particularly true in the case of Serra do Curral, a Brazilian natural heritage site as well, and a place of a long and intense dispute beginning back in 1950s. And so this conflict between cultural values and economic greed extends itself into present time, having a preliminary authorization for mining in Serra do Curral outside its protection limits been issued to some company a few months ago. So it's a kind of mess now in Belo Horizonte. There follows a brief overview of Serra do Curral immaterial values. This map is a survey of Curral del Rei, a village located at the foot of Serra do Curral until 1894. This village was land leveled to make room for the implementation of the new capital of Minas Gerais, a political decision following the establishment of Republic in Brazil, as I said before. And since the beginnings of Belo Horizonte, Serra do Curral has always been a dominant element in the pictorial and iconographic representation of urban space. So much that when the new capital construction commission started its works, the engineers depicted the topographic survey of the region facing southward, where the Serra do Curral is, instead of northward as required by technical norms already applied by that time. Arão Reis, the chief engineer, which is this short man holding the map, seemed to be mesmerized by the mountain's steep slope, which he could see from his house and his office at the future municipal park area. Following design plans made by the construction commission maintain the same criteria of representation. Belo Horizonte is always depicted against the Serra do Curral. The mountain is the protagonist of urban space, as we can see in this picture taken during the city's inauguration in 1897, and also in the first pictures of the new capital. The next decades will keep on the same path. The mountain remains the reference for pictorial representations and maps of the growing city, always looking southward, where the Serra do Curral is. Until that, in late 1970s, the mining activity in Águas Claras becomes clearly visible from Belo Horizonte. So the mountain is being deeply hurt by the mining process. And the first voice to raise up against the destruction belongs to a specialist in symbolic production, an artist, of course, Carlos Drummond de Andrade, the greatest Brazilian poet ever. His lifetime work was much dedicated to denounce in a subjective manner the impact of mining industry over collective memory and Minas Gerais cultural identity. Having lived in Belo Horizonte during his years of formation, he wrote this well-known poem against the threatening to the city's main symbol following his last visit to Belo Horizonte. I think it's around 78 or 77. So being deeply affected by what he saw and felt in Serra do Curral, Carlos Drummond de Andrade never returned to the capital anymore. In this picture, we can see what is, or what was better said, the Cauê Peak, an iron ore mining site in Itabira, a small town not distant from Belo Horizonte. Okay, so two important historic facts put Itabira on the map of Brazil. That's where Carlos Drummond de Andrade, the poet, was born in 1901, and where Vale, one of the biggest mining companies in the world today, and Águas Claras site present owner, where Vale was founded in 1948. So Vale was founded also in Itabira. From then on, Carlos Drummond de Andrade and Vale lives were permanently connected, being Drummond Vale's most notorious critic until his death in 1987. In his visits to his hometown, Drummond saw the Cauê Peak, this imponent mountain of sheer iron, being cut off from Itabira's landscape by Vale. According to Maurício Sampaio, an art critic also born in Itabira, Cauê's mining pit is the biggest sculpture ever made, in which the void resembles the original mountain by its negative shape, thus conjuring its presence by an absence. Drummond is the most eloquent voice in expressing, even in forging through words, the deep connection between the Mineiros, the people of Minas Gerais. Mineiros are the people of Minas Gerais, and the local landscape, a deep sense of belonging. We can see this idea in this early poem by him. Each of them, inhabitants of Itabira, has a piece of him or herself in Cauê Peak, as if the mountain were constituted by them all. They are the mountain. They are pieces, to tell the truth. Here, their fragmentation corresponds to that one of the mountain, torn to pieces by the minerary process. Inversely, in this other fragment, we learn that spiritually, the iron of the mountain constitutes the inhabitants of Itabira, 8% of iron in our souls. So the mountain is them. Reading Drummond, one can understand what does the mountainous landscape of Minas Gerais means for Mineiro. It's not just a natural landscape, not only a beautiful scenery. Instead, it's a cultural landscape full of meaning and secrecy that shapes our cultural identity. This is how I want to address the Serra do Curral in my communication to you today. Following Drummond's poem, Sad Horizon, that I presented before, wrote in 78, a mounting concern and awareness of the damage to the Serra do Curral and its natural environment gave place to other forms of political action through artistic creations, such as this plastic tag by the artist Manfredo Souza Neto. It reads in English, "Pay attention to the mountains." It was used in the car's windshields in Belo Horizonte and became very popular at that time. In the same direction, these two postcards aimed at denouncing the impact of mining over Serra do Curral. It reads on the right, "The place of the absence." So we came to the quadrilátero ferrífero, or iron quadrangle in English, where Águas Claras mine is located. This is a very complex region in terms of its history and occupation processes, as well as for its environmental and scientific importance and cultural meaning. This region sets the broad context for Águas Claras' future use project. It's defined by a group of mountain ranges whose geologic history is situated between 3.2 and 1.7 billion years ago. This is one of the classical sites for world geology to understand our planet's deep history, including the first form of a more complex life surgence in the primitive ocean, the cyanobacteria. From a historic point of view, the process that resulted in the economic occupation of Brazilian hinterland began in the end of the 17th century, when the Portuguese crown's long dream for gold findings in Brazil finally became true. So in this picture, you can see one of the earlier maps of the gold mines region, so present Minas Gerais state. In the lower right, we can see the Vila de Nossa Senhora de Mariana do Carmo, currently the town of Mariana, where gold nuggets were firstly found. More than 300 years later, Mariana is back on the map, this time on the one showing one of the most terrible mining accidents in history. I will come to that soon. In the economic occupation following gold findings, the various indigenous peoples living in the region for ages were expelled. Considered to be a lazy workforce by the mine's owners, they were replaced by African slaves, setting up a social process that still affects in a structural manner the Brazilian society as a whole. Such socioeconomic process is a major subject for Brazilian historians today, particularly for those in Minas Gerais, that is, to narrate the history of gold exploration in Brazil from the perspective of those silenced voices, that of the Black people brought from Africa as slaves. And the relatively large wealth accumulation that followed the gold findings made it possible for sophisticated urban culture to flourish in the colony during the 18th century, being Vila Rica, later named Ouro Preto, the most significant example of that. The achievements of the so-called Barroco Mineiro, the Baroque style manifestation in the gold mines region, include architectonic jewels such as São Francisco de Assis Church and Nossa Senhora do Rosário Church, both designed by Antônio Francisco Lisboa. And important realizations in sculpture, here we see two works by the same Antônio Francisco Lisboa, painting, literature, and music. So this is the current context of quadrilátero ferrífero. This is a satellite picture taken in July 2015. It shows on the lower right, Bento Rodrigues, a small village near Mariana in Quadrilátero Ferrífero. On the upper left, we can see Fábrica Nova, an iron ore mine run by Samarco Mineração, a mining company controlled by Vale and the English-Australian BHP Billiton, two of the largest mining companies in the world. This used to be the mining rejects dam until 4:20 p.m., the 5th of November, 2015. When the dam collapsed, obliterating the village downstream. "19 people were killed by a mud torrent that buried the village." Here you can see in brown the level of the mud torrent, how high it reached. Through the region's many waterways, 39 million cubic meters of mud, a number equivalent to the volume of Sugarloaf in Rio, soon reached the Rio Doce Valley. It's important to say that Rio Doce's watershed comprises 230 municipalities in Minas Gerais and Espírito Santo state. Approximately 2 million people live in Rio Doce Basin. Along the river, many cities depend on its water for human consumption and other uses. The river was also a primary source of income for many families, mainly fishermen's ones. The Rio Doce banks near Espírito Santo are also the native place for Krenak indigenous ethnicity who still live in that area. Their community has been severely affected by the accident, both materially as immaterially. Ailton Krenak, an activist and writer, a distinguished Brazilian thinker, once told me they were in mourning. The Krenaks were in mourning because their grandfather, the river, had died. And according to many environment experts, the effect of the mud over the coastal ecosystems will be felt for no less than 100 years. And so, as if things were not so bad that could not get worse, yes, this is a saying in Brazil, 4 years later, another dam collapsed. It took place in Quadrilátero Ferrífero region again, involving once more an iron ore rejects dam. But this time it affected Vale in its core, since Córrego do Feijão mine was run by Vale. This used to be the dam until January 25th, 2019, when the dam collapsed. This accident left a tragic number of 264 deaths, turning to be the second largest industrial accident in the world in 21st century. 6 people are still missing. So I asked how to address a mining repair project in Quadrilátero Ferrífero within such a complex and dramatic context. By the time Brumadinho's reject dam collapsed, I had just finished to read this book that really overwhelmed me. The Falling Sky, Words of a Yanomami Shaman in English. In this narrative, Davi Kopenawa, which is a Yanomami shaman, an activist. So Kopenawa presents Yanomami's cosmogony and cosmology, in which the most catastrophic event that may happen to Yanomami people is the fall of the sky, which for them is very heavy. Helping to sustain it is the main duty for a shaman, who must act as a cosmic engineer, let's say. And I quote Kopenawa's words in the book. The things that white people work so hard to extract from the depths of the earth, minerals and oil, are not foods. These are evil and dangerous things, saturated with coughs and fevers, which Omama is the Yanomami's demiurge, which Omama was the only one to know. But long ago, he, Omama, decided to hide them very deep under the forest's floor, so they could not make us sick. This is why they must be left where he has always kept them buried. The forest is the flesh and skin of our earth, which is the back of the old sky Hutukara that fell in the beginning of time. The metal Omama hid in its soil is its skeleton, which the forest surrounds in humid coolness. These outsiders continue relentlessly digging the earth like giant armadillos, even though they already possess more than enough merchandise. Despite this, they do not think they will be contaminated like we are. They are wrong. So this is the end of the quotation. We can see that for the Yanomami people, the minerals Omama buried in the earth are the sky's foundations, and that the sky fell down in the beginning of times. Further on in the book, we came to know that the sky collapsed a second time, destroying their world. It happened when white men appeared in Yanomami's land for the first time, and moreover, that the sky is about to fall again. That's why Davi Kopenawa decided to write his book, to warn us of the terrible danger we are all facing. When we think about the relations between nature and culture, an important question raised by Águas Claras project, we tend to think in terms of two distinct dimensions. But there are other ways to address this question, like the following idea posed by Ailton Krenak, the important Brazilian activist and writer I mentioned before, in an interview to this literary and arts magazine I edit with other friends in Brazil. It reads, I quote, "Nature is a creation of the culture. You can only think about nature if you are outside of it. How can a baby in a mother's womb think the mother? How can a seed think the fruit? It's from the outside one thinks the inside." End of quotation. Another important conceptual milestone, to address such questions in the project itself. So another conceptual milestone was this seminal essay, Perspectivism and Multinaturalism in Indigenous America, by the distinguished Brazilian anthropologist Eduardo Viveiros de Castro. This essay was published in this book, launched in English under the title, The Land Within, Indigenous Territory and Perception of the Environment. As Viveiros de Castro put it, the Amerindian perspectivism is, I quote, "the conception common to many people of the continent, according to which the world is inhabited by different sorts of subjects or persons, human and non-human, which apprehend reality from distinct points of view, end of quotation. So his concept let us think that the very idea of humanity is not a fixed condition, rather a vicarious one that depends on the position the subject occupies in a given moment in relation to the other. For instance, a hungry person sees a fish the same way he or she is seen by a hungry jaguar. That is, everyone is human in his or her own dimension, so to say. In this other book, The Ends of the World, in English, by the same author, with the philosopher Deborah Danovsky, this book offers a bold interpretation of current discourses on the end of the world in the face of the growing perception of the dire effects of global warming. It aims at inventing a mythology that is adequate to our present, having important implications for the future development of ecological practices. All right, but what to do with this hole in the ground? We decided that the mining pit, together with the lake, should remain exactly the way they are, a testimony for future generation, if there's a future to come, of how deep our present civilization were capable of interfere into nature. The mining pit thus turned into a memento mori of our civilization. So that's an idea we liked very much. And from it came this simple but powerful idea that would be repeated as a mantra throughout the project. The territory is the protagonist. But how to grab such an immense territory? As I said, we're talking about an area of around 1,900 acres. That's when this 1893 design plan of Belo Horizonte came to my mind. A grid of 100 per 100 meter squares used to ordinate urban space. A generative concept that, due to its abstraction, can potentially grow in every direction. But grid is a modern age concept, and that's precisely modern age practices regarding nature what's been criticized in our approach to the project. Nevertheless, the grid can be used to study and classify a given site, such as in archaeology. In our case, it could also be directed into the future to monitor natural and artificial processes that happen during time, to watch them and to learn from them. So, stealing the idea from our fellows, the archaeologists, we decided to use their method to metaphorically dig into the site and to understand how natural processes could be used to regenerate local environment. We learned that natural processes often occur through superposition of layers. For instance, the geologic layer defines Earth's morphology, directing the course of the water on the surface of the planet. And where there's water, very likely there will be vegetation. Water and vegetation create a fertile environment for animals, which in turn will spread seeds and pollen, helping flora to thrive. Of course, it's also necessary to include ourselves in the ecosystem's equation. After all, in the end, according to Ailton Krenak, nature is nothing but an abstraction created by ourselves to get us apart from it. And obviously, water is to play a major role in the ecosystem's restoration. As we can see in this map, the site's north portion, that means around, more or less around the lake, has barely a water stream to the right of the lake. That's due to the sterile iron ore depositions, which are non-commercial leftovers of mining production. So these sterile iron ore depositions buried the water streams in that area. We must remember we are in a slope of a mountain. So our first proposal was to restore the local water tissue, recreating over the sterile depositions the creek's original courses. The idea is to feed them, these recreated water streams, is to feed them by draining rainwater, as well as using the lake's water surplus, meaning the amount of water you can take from the lake without interfering on its level, since it's being permanently fed by the Kawe aquifer, the massive body of groundwater beneath it. In that area, the restored water tissue could be used in the future for recreational and landscape purposes too. And again, in the same pace, we understood that it was possible to read the territory using the layers method. In this way, getting to know the potentials of each layer in terms of its contribution to the ecosystem's repair and preservation, as well as for knowledge production on the territory, educational and cultural purposes, ecotourism, scientific tourism, etc. Here we see the hydric system potentials, being the Kawe aquifers recharge, a central one. It occurs mainly in the steepest areas of the mountain due to the rock layer's position. The creation of ecological corridors as well, connecting Águas Claras to nearby conservation units, is an important measure to assure gene flow and thus local species conservation. Landscape interpretation is to play an important role in the project too. The ecosystem services already provided by Jambreiro Forest can be largely improved in other parts of the area too through conservation. I will talk briefly about the project goals, and we're coming to the last part of the presentation. This figure aims to map part of the immaterial values of the communities set around Águas Claras, among which are descendants of slaves forced to work in gold mining in 18th and 19th centuries. Conducted today by the poorer communities of the neighboring areas, spiritual practices such as Umbanda rituals. Umbanda is an African Brazilian syncretic religion that mix African, indigenous, and Christian practices. So these rituals conducted by these communities find in Serra do Curral an important place for them to happen. Richer communities, for their turn, use this natural space mainly for leisure and sports. The fact is, both consider Serra do Curral to play an important role in their communal practices. A significant number of popular events involving popular culture, fairs, and initiatives of solidarity economy are also present in this territory. So in order to establish projects framework in terms of communities' main expectations and worries regarding Águas Claras' future use, a consultation, I would say a large consultation process was set. And I would put out these 2 points as particularly relevant for the project. So considering all the information I presented till now, that is the site's materiality and its immaterial values, the quadrilateral ferríferous historic and current context, the community's fears and expectations, to whom I would add the cultural potentials of the site in terms of science, history, and nature as well. It became clear from the beginning that the project should meet these 4 dimensions, environmental recovery and preservation, to include, of course, social practices and be determined by them, cultural meaning and economic development, mainly for the poorer communities inhabiting the territory. So from then on, they turn to be, these 4 guidelines tended to be our, our main guidelines to approach this very complex project that, as I said before, is still under development. So that would be all, fellows. Thank you for your attention and patience.